You're listening to the REI Clarity Podcast, the show that guides you from confusion to clarity and sets you on the path to financial freedom faster. Learn how to grow your portfolio the right way with your host, REI advisor and co-founder of Shine Insurance, Jeremy Goodrich.
Welcome to REI Clarity. I'm your host, Jeremy Goodrich, and on the episode today, we're going to do a moment of clarity. In a moment of clarity, this is when I take one thing that a guest said in a previous conversation and kind of expound on it, describe it a little bit more, make sure that you have a clear understanding of what that person was talking about. So this episode is broken into 3 parts, each about 8 to 10 minutes long, and each one is a different guest that I talked to. So the first one is Amy Mahjoory. She talked about how to network to find private money. It was a great conversation, and she had a 4-step process for sort of building that capacity to network to find private money. And so that's what I talk about in the first section of this moment of clarity. The second one is with Monick Halm, and Monick talked about how to invest in real estate without owning property. And so what I break down is 6 different ways that you can invest in real estate without owning property. And finally, Yonah Weiss was the next interview that I had, and Yonah Weiss talked about cost segregation. That's what he does. That's where his expertise is. So in this episode, I break down what is cost segregation and really give a very basic description of exactly what you can expect from cost segregation and how it helps you with your taxes for that year on your real estate investments. So there it is. If you're interested in one of those 3 things or all 3 of those things, this will definitely provide a deeper understanding for you so you can move forward with a clear knowledge of those topics. And then if you didn't listen to the episode with one of these 3 awesome guests, I'd encourage you to go back and listen to that show. And with the grounding of having listened to this show, I think it'll really help you understand that conversation more. So without further ado, let's jump into the first moment of clarity with Amy Mahjoory. In my conversation with Amy, she described the FACT method, which is a piece of what she does, and it starts with foundation. You have to know your why. Who are you? Why do you do what you do? Not just to make money, but how are you making the world a better place? How are you making your family better? How are you making yourself better? People want to connect with you. In fact, when they're investing, they are deciding on you. And so you need to be able to articulate who you are and why you're doing what you're doing in the best way possible. You also need to be able to articulate as a foundation what is in it for them. They need to understand pretty quickly who you are, why you're doing what you're doing, and how they can connect, what they can gain from that connection. Pretty simple, right? You need to have a foundation that is understandable. The A is action. So you need to, as soon as you have that foundation, start to build small relationships. Big relationships grow out of small relationships. And the quicker you have a small relationship, the quicker that can become a big relationship. So start to grow those small relationships right now. Well, how do you do that? Well, first you want to be remarkable and consistent in the things that you're doing, in the ways that you're going out there. Whatever your plan is, whatever your action step is for going out there and starting small relationships, make sure it is remarkable, which means it's interesting and people are going to grow from it, and you are consistent in what you're doing. Basically, what I'm saying is you have to add value to people's lives. If you're going out into social media spaces, LinkedIn, Facebook, or wherever, and adding value, then folks are going to naturally attract to you. And if folks are naturally attracting to you and you have a good foundation, now things are starting to snowball and you're starting to get those smaller relationships going. So you can do that right now. You can do that today. You can go out and comment on people's posts. You can go out and create content and value. You can go out and look at other people doing those things and seeing what they're doing as well. Sign up for some the different sign-up things that folks have that are doing similar work to you and see what their funnels look like and things of that nature. Now, number 3 is that you have to have credibility. Of course, at some point, someone's going to say, hey, I like what you're doing, and I would like to get involved in an offer. What do you have? There we go. We're at the point we want to be, but you have to have credibility in this moment, right? So you have to have a clear offering memorandum or presentation deck. You have to be able to quickly and easily articulate the value of the deal that you're bringing to that investor, right? And that needs to look good. It needs to look clean. It needs to be clear. It should not be on some 1980s, whatever that you mail to them and gets them in a week or something. You've got to have a clear, presentable idea for what it is that this investment is going to look like, and that is credibility. You also need to have contracts ready, right? If they say yes to your offering memorandum, they say, hey, I'd like to give you a soft yes. I want to understand what this contract really looks like. You need to be able to follow through with that quickly. That needs to look good. It needs to be a solid contract that is both going to show the value for them and for you. And it's going to make things work well. So credibility has to do with the systems you have in place when someone says, hey, I'm interested, and taking it from there. The last thing I would say about credibility is you need to know your underwriting. If someone starts asking you about this deal, you need to be able to answer those questions. You need to be able to know the neighborhood. You need to be able to know the numbers. You need to know the value add that you're going to put in if that's the approach you're taking. The more you know about the deal, the more knowledgeable you are about the deal, the more you can present that credibility to a potential investor, and then you're going to get that much more likely to get a yes. And then finally, you're just going out and hopefully getting this fourth piece, which is get that first deal done. Getting those transactions done. Key part is doing it, right? You get one transaction done, you get a little bit better. The next transaction, a little bit better, and so on and so forth. So if you get the first 3 steps together, you should have some opportunities, and you just need to get those deals done. All right, so how does this connect with the framework? Like we said at the beginning, it brings us into connections. You have to grow your community. So our conversation here is absolutely growing your community so that you can find the money, so that you can really make these deals happen. So there it is, the fact method with Amy Mahjoory. Really a basic concept, no matter what kind of business you have or what kind of work you're doing. Like, this is how you understand yourself, understand how to articulate yourself to other people, and understand how to use the systems that exist to really grow your network and your community of people. Such an important part of all business endeavors, and certainly real estate investing. So now we're going to break down the conversation I had with Monick Halm. We talked a lot about passive investing. And so this section of our moment of clarity is all about the 6 ways, and there's more than 6 ways, obviously, but 6 ways that you can passively invest in real estate. All right, number 1, wholesaling. Wholesaling is the first way that we can passively invest in real estate. And the way that we do that is very simple. We find deals, and then we connect buyers with sellers. So essentially, we are finding the deals and getting a cut by connecting those people. So you say, well, if you give me $1,000, I'll connect you with this deal, and you start to make that connection. That's the very simple explanation of wholesaling. So what is the pro? Well, no money needed. You can do this with nothing in your pocket and find a way to make money, and lots of people have done that very successfully. The con is that it takes a lot of time. You're looking for deals, you're looking for buyers, you're looking for sellers. All that takes a lot of time, and so it's a low money, high time way of passively investing. The second one is online investment trusts. These can be called REITs. Essentially, this is a passive way of investing in large real estate opportunities. It's very similar to the stock market in a lot of ways. You're putting small amounts of money into much bigger deals that maybe you don't have, well, you definitely don't have any control over at all. So the pro is that there's a lower barrier to entry. You can get sometimes with $1,000, $2,000, you can start getting in on these deals. There are plenty of cons, and lots of people have different opinions about what those cons are. They can be less profitable. They don't have the tax benefits that you get when you invest in property actually. There could be a lot of confusion simply because there are a lot of different ways you can do a REIT and do online investment trusts. And with that confusion can come con people and things like that. So you have to be careful and knowledgeable about what you're doing in this space. But the barrier to entry is low. And so that can be a place that you can passively invest in real estate. All right, number 3, tax lien investing. This is when you purchase a lien from the government. So if you own a property and you don't pay your taxes, the government comes in and says, hey, we're putting a lien on your property, and until you pay your taxes, you can't sell it. There's lots of things that you can't do until you pay those taxes. You can go in and buy the lien from the government. You own the lien now, and the great thing is the government goes and still tries to collect that money. And then when they get that money, they give you the money plus some interest, often a lucrative amount of interest. So the pros are that it is very hands-off. Essentially, you're buying this lien, and then the government is going and trying to collect the money. The con is you could end up being a property investor. If the taxes do not get paid, then you end up with that property. And in some ways, this video is all about not being in that space. So that's obviously a con. But if you're okay with that and comfortable with the situation there, either turning around and selling it or what have you, then that may not be a very big con to you. Number 4 is bank note investing. Without getting in the weeds about mortgages are when banks loan people money. You can invest on the back end of banks loaning people money, essentially taking that risk away from the bank and putting it on yourself. There's different ways to do that and different types of risk you're taking, whether it's a performing or non-performing note and so on. So you want to know what you're doing, but that is certainly a way to do it. A pro is that it is a long-term investment. You're picking up mortgages for the most part, although there's different kinds of loans you can pick up. So it's a long-term investment strategy. The cons are, of course, that borrowers could fail to pay, and so there may be a little bit higher risk there, but all these, things have some risk associated. You just have to decide on that. Okay, number 5, my personal favorite, the one I like to get involved in, is syndication. This is kind of crowdfunding for real estate. There are lots of different ways to do syndication, but essentially a group of people get involved financially with a specific real estate deal. An example would be a large multifamily apartment complex, a 400-unit apartment complex. The folks who are actually doing the buy and going to follow through with all the things that are happening go out and find people who will invest in the deal and make financial agreements with them. That is syndication at its most basic. The pros are that there is a big potential, very profitable element to syndication. You can make very good money off of syndication if you get in on the right deal, of course. The cons are that there is a fairly high barrier to entry. The lowest number for the most part is around $50,000, and most of the time $100,000 is where you're going to need to start to really be profiting and connecting with these deals. So pretty high financial barrier to entry, but also a high potential money-making scenario. So that is the fifth one. Finally, number 6 is private money lending. So this is simply when you take your money and you go to an investor and connect with them on the investment deal, and you give them their money and they invest it in whatever it is. They could be doing flips. That could be a big apartment complex. It's basically a one-on-one deal between you as a private money lender and the person who is investing. So very simple. The pros are that you're connected a lot more with the project. You have an integral conversation and relationship with the investors that are doing the work. A lot of times you're the only investor, or maybe there's only 2 or 3, and so you're really connected with the deal. It's about as close to owning being a property owner as you can get in this sort of passive approach. The cons are that there's a higher risk in some ways because you're dealing with investors who maybe don't have as much street cred or whatever, and then there's a higher barrier to entry, as there was with syndication. A lot of times, if you're going to be the one purchasing the property, then you've got to have $100,000 or whatever that property is. So that's the 6th one, which is private money lending. Okay, back to the framework as always. How did this connect? Well, again, this one's pretty straightforward. It is know your strategy, and the strategy in this example is how to invest in real estate without actually owning properties. No tenants, toilets, or termites, like Monick Halm says. All
All right, there it is, Monick Halm. One of her main points was no excuses for choosing to not invest in real estate. If you want to make your money grow, if you want to find financial freedom, you can do so even if you don't want to deal with being an actual landlord. So that was 6 ways that you could do that. I hope that was helpful. Our final element of the moment of clarity, our final moment of clarity is with Yonah Weiss, and he described cost segregation. And so what I do here in this next section is simply lay it out as simply as possible exactly what cost segregation is, how it works, and who it's for. I hope you enjoy.
Cost segregation is a tax strategy, and it's based on depreciation. Understanding depreciation is the key to understanding cost segregation. So let's talk for a second about depreciation. Depreciation is the concept that as things get older, they lose value. Again, as things get older, they lose value. That makes kind of sense. Okay, so if we think about a car, if you buy a 2020 brand new car, the rule of thumb is that when you drive it off the lot, it's worth less than it was when you bought it new. And in 5 years, it will be less than it's worth right now. So a car is a great example of something that depreciates. As it gets older, it's worth less until it goes down to almost zero. Of course, if you have a classic car, that's a completely different story. That sort of changes the topic. But for the sake of describing and understanding depreciation, a car is a great example. Now, if we think about a house, though, a house really isn't worth less over time. You don't buy a house and then 20 years later it's worth zero because it's 20 years old. Houses actually don't depreciate, but the term is used in this tax strategy that we're talking about in taxes around real estate for you to be able to write off some of the value of your house in taxes. So even though depreciation really doesn't actually exist in real estate, depreciation is used as a tax element in the way things work. So it's just sort of the way it sets up. So what are taxes? Obviously, taxes funds the government collects to provide essential services, right? So we've got depreciation, something losing value over time, and we have taxes, which are the key to cost segregation, this combination between depreciation and taxes. And then there are tax deductions, things that can be subtracted from your income to lower your income schedule. Okay, we've got the basic facts. We got depreciation. We know what taxes are. We know what tax deductions are. You're saying, hey, I knew all that stuff already. Let's dig into how cost segregation works. So you have to understand the tax depreciation schedule that is set up by the IRS. And they say that a house depreciates to $0 from the time of purchase over 27 and a half years. So if you buy a property for $200,000, it will depreciate equally over the years over time, over 27 and a half years. And at the end of that 27 and a half years, there will be no more tax depreciation because you've taken all the depreciation. Interestingly, it starts over if you if someone buys it from you 10 years from now for $250,000, that 27 and a half years starts over at that point at $250,000 for the next 27 and a half years. So using that 27 and a half years, we would say that 3.6% per year is basically what we would be looking at. All right, we've got all the basic facts we need to dig into what is cost segregation. So cost segregation is a way to accelerate the depreciation timeline. I said 27 and a half years, right? But there is a way to accelerate the depreciation timeline. So this is how it works. Well, there are actually 4 depreciation schedules, 4 parts of your property that depreciate at different times. If you don't break them out, you just use the 27 and a half for your entire property. If you have $1 million property, you use 27 and a half for the whole thing. But if we do cost segregation, we break out these 4 different things. So what are those 4 things? Well, one is land. The second is the building. The third is land improvements. And the fourth and most powerful in cost segregation is personal property. So they all depreciate at different amounts. Land gets no depreciation at all. Land is land, doesn't depreciate. That makes sense. The building is the 27 and a half years. Land improvements is 15 years. See, that's a little bit shorter. And personal property is 5 years, way shorter. So if we used cost segregation strategy, we are going to analyze the property and put everything into those 4 buckets. We're going to separate it out. What is the value of the land? What is the value of the building itself? What is the value of the land improvements? And what is the value of the personal property? Now, you may think about your properties and say, well, I don't really have much personal property in them. But the personal property is defined as fixtures, cabinets, appliances. And so you start to see, oh, well, if all those things are defined as personal property, that number could add up pretty quickly. The only thing considered the building is the actual frame and drywall and things like that. Even the carpet can be considered personal property. So a lot of the things that are in your properties can be considered that personal property element. So let's dig into an example. Let's say for a nice round number, you have $1 million property. Okay, well, if you use the 27.5-year schedule, you should be able to deduct about $36,000 each year as a part of your depreciation on your taxes. Okay, but what if we break it out? What if we just say, and I'm making up these numbers, but they don't seem like they would be that far off. The land is $100,000 in value. The building is $500,000 in value. The land improvements are $100,000 in value, and the personal property is $300,000 in value. So I've segregated out the 4 different elements, and I can depreciate them at their different amounts. In that example, you would be able to deduct $84,000. It's almost $50,000 more than you could deduct if you just left it in the normal 27 and a half years. So that is how cost segregation works. By breaking it into the 4 buckets, we can depreciate more quickly. So who should do it? Well, Yonah Weiss is a cost segregation specialist. When we talked on the show, one of the big things he brought up is there is some cost associated with doing this. It can be $5,000, $6,000 at the base to do this process. So you have to make sure that it's actually going to be worth it to be able to go through this process. So who should do it? Well, probably not folks who have a $200,000, $300,000 property and that's it. You really should probably have at least a $600,000, $700,000 property before the cost of doing a cost segregation makes sense for the benefit of the tax deductions. All right, so again, at the very end, how does this connect to our REI Clarity framework? Well, it is finding the money, right? If we can keep money in our pocket, then of course we're finding more money, and that is a good thing.
There it was, 3 moments of clarity. Amy Mahjoory, Monick Halm, and Yonah Weiss. Thank you so much for sharing your insights in our conversations. And I hope all of you got some insight in exactly how each of the things that they really focused on work, and you have a better understanding of that. If you haven't gone and listened to the episodes with those guests, please go ahead and hear those conversations. There was so much more to what we talked about than just these little snippets. But I wanted to break these out as really basic learning tools about what we're doing here, about growing our capacity to invest in real estate and grow wealth for ourselves and find financial freedoms for our families. And so hopefully this was helpful to you. If you had any one section of this that you really enjoyed and want to share with other folks, I hope you'll pick up your phone and share this with them right now. Maybe say, hey, listen to the second part. It was really great when Jeremy talked about the 6 different ways you can invest in passive income. Make sure that we help everyone level up. All right, if you have not left a rating or review, if you have listened to at least one episode of the show, and certainly if you've listened to 2 episodes, I hope you'll click right now over, give us a 5-star rating, and leave a review. Talk about what's been valuable and what you'd like to hear next. It really does help us make this show better, and that is what we're out here to do. All right, lastly, if you have not joined the Facebook group already, please do so. Head over to Facebook and REI Clarity. All of our guests are there talking with folks about their questions, ideas. We're all growing together. So we'll see you in the Facebook group. All right, until the next time, here's to clarity that builds financial freedom faster.